All right, looks like we are live. How exciting. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Niki Davis with Love Life Telehealth. All right, looks like we are live. How exciting. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Niki Davis with Love Life Telehealth. All right, looks like we are live. How
That's
exciting.
interesting.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm not sure why we're getting feedback. All right, looks like we are live. How exciting. Okay, so something is getting replayed through your speaker there, I think, Dr. Pierce. Not sure what's going on with that. Okay, that's okay. We can adjust. We'll figure this out. All right. Well, anyway, today I am super excited to welcome you to a special webinar, and we are going to be talking specifically about processed foods and ultra processed foods. So you might be wondering, what exactly is a processed food or an ultra processed food, and how does it affect my body? Well, joining me today is Dr. Jeff Pierce, and he is another one of the lifestyle medicine physicians that I work with at Love Life Telehealth. And he had the opportunity recently to write an article for the National Health Association on this very topic. Now, this article is not going to be published until the spring edition. So today is kind of like a little sneak peek into what he has learned through the research he did in preparing to write this article. So I'm excited to pick his brain today. So how are you today, Dr. Pierce? Oh, you are muted.
Dr. Pierce. It's weird. I still have that audio delay where I'm hearing everything twice. So I'm gonna come out and be right back.
Okay, sounds good.
Audio delay where I'm hearing.
All right. So while we're waiting for Dr. Pierce, let's see. So one of the things that we are going to discuss today is the definition of what is a minimally processed food, what is a processed food, and what is an ultra processed food. So I want you to start thinking about those definitions and what you understand those to be. So, if you think about the history of eating food and preparing food, and those to be. You're still getting that? Okay. All right. Eating food and preparing food, and those to be. You're still. So hopefully we'll be able to have him join us today. But anyway, so the history of preparing foods, there has always been a little bit of processing that happens, whether that's grinding corn, baking something, cooking something over the fire. There's always been a little bit of that going on, but that is what we would call minimally processed. So for instance, if you're going to have oats, instead of just eating the oats as they are, you're going to do a little bit of processing, like cooking them down a little bit. But then you go into more of a processed food, and that's when, that's what we're going to talk about today, is what does that exactly look like? All right. I'm not hearing myself again.
Yes, I think we have it figured out now.
All right, perfect. So I was just talking about, I don't know if you heard, but we're talking about kind of the definitions. So today we're talking about processed foods, ultra processed foods. So, thinking about kind of the history of foods and how there has been some minimal processing of foods in the history of preparing foods, but that now there's this kind of new generation of very processed food-like substances. I like that term. And then there's the ultra processed. So do you mind just kind of walking us through the different definitions of what processed food really is?
Sure. So if we think about a totally unprocessed food, that is basically, I guess you'd have to like eat the apple on the tree because you haven't actually picked it yet. But basically, when we're talking about these whole unprocessed foods, it's, fruits and vegetables that you just eat it like it grew. Minimally processing involves, what we've been doing, like you said, for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe a million years if you talk about just cooking things or chopping things or grinding things. And then, fermenting and salting and curing and all these other smoking, all these things that humans have done for just millennia. Um, but it's just very recently that we've gotten the processing to a point to where it is vastly different than that. This what's termed ultra processed foods, where really uh, a lot of things are taken out during the processing that are good for our health. A lot of things are put back in that are bad for our health. Generally, it gives these foods longer shelf life. There have to be things added to make them more palatable. Because of all the processing, it makes them taste worse than they did before the processing. To the point to where these foods, have almost no relationship to where they started with, like, apples versus Apple Jacks are completely different, with apples and applesauce being much closer related. And we're going to delve into why all of this processing is so bad for us and how it's kind of taken over our food stream.
Well, and and that makes me think, do Apple Jacks actually have apples in them? Right? Because there's so many flavorings now that you don't know if you're actually getting any of the original food product into that.
Yeah.
But it's actually really helpful to hear that definition, because I think, a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to drink a smoothie because it's really processed. But really, smoothie, you're just blending it up, right? You're taking all those whole foods and you're basically pre-chewing them before you drink it. But you're not taking anything away. You're not adding any additives or anything like that to it. So the processed food, it's helpful to understand that it really is about, removing things from that original source and then adding extra, maybe lab derived additives to something to
Right.
make it more like a food-like substance.
Right. And, some minimal processing is done just so that we can incorporate it, that we can actually digest it, right? Like raw pinto beans, not so good on the teeth, not so good for our bodies. So we got to cook them, right? And we've been cooking beans, I'm sure, for thousands of years, and that is great for us. I think, even in the example of blended food, it's interesting where a blended green smoothie is great for us, particularly if we're not already eating cups of greens a day. And for some people, that's really the only time that they're going to get their greens in. But when they look at studies where they blend apples, you'll see more of a sugar spike than if you've eaten those apples. And I think in part is the idea of this food matrix, like the apple grew sort of perfectly if with all of the structure of the cells and whatnot. And even in blended apples, we haven't removed anything, and still we might see a little bit more of a sugar spike. But that's still far and away better than apple juice or apple Jolly Ranchers and all these other things that are way, way further down the line.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So okay, so we kind of know the definitions now. I guess when and how did this all happen? I know this is more recent, but is it like 60s, 70s? When did we start seeing these changes to how we manufacture food?
Yeah, I think the big change seemed to happen in the 70s. We There's a nice graph where it shows that both for men and for women, for various ethnicities, you see a sharp incline in obesity in the 70s. And it's certainly not all of a sudden at the same time all people lost a motivation to exercise or something, or lost their willpower. It's something happened in our food stream that led to this sharp uptick, and seemed like it was a combination of things. There were improvements in in the actual processing of foods, where there were more ingredients that would help increase the shelf life of something, uh, uh, different kinds of freezing and shipping techniques, and in the same sort of frame of getting these commodity crops to become more affordable. So we'll say, based on various government regulations, growing corn and soy, for example, is subsidized by our tax money, and it's very inexpensive to make. And so here we have processes that can they're improved ways to process corn and soy. The corn and soy is cheap, and so then in the lab, especially if you add the right amount of salt and oil and sugar and emulsifiers and thickeners and different ways to make the mouth feel just really make all of our senses fire at the same time, we had this perfect storm to where these unhealthy foods are cheap to make, and the companies can make a big profit from them. So it
Yeah,
seems like the change happened in the 70s.
yeah, interesting. Well, and one of the things that I thought was interesting that I learned about recently was that they specifically try to make foods soft so that they're easier to eat and you can eat more of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of people might be thinking, well, but Cheetos aren't soft, but actually they are, because once you bite down on that, you get like maybe one or two crunches, right? And then it's just this soft, gooey, and they call that like disappearing calories or
Mhm.
disappearing calorie density, right? It's
Mhm.
very easy to eat a lot of those. And so then it's very calorically dense.
Yeah.
So you're getting tons of calories with this kind of method that they're using to try to make foods easier to over ingest.
Right. And I think that's a huge point right there, right? Because um we have this sense of, oh, look, the bag says extra crunchy, and we bite into it and we get this great crisp feel. But you're right, in a couple of bites it's turned into mush, and then we swallow it and we're ready for the next handhold. And compare that to eating a you know a kale salad or something. Like, we're working out our facial muscles, our jaw muscles, etc., because it takes forever to chew this stuff, right? And that, I think, is a key component of why we tend to overeat. There is this good sort of landmark study in this field by Kevin Hall, where folks were basically locked inside a study hospital ward and fed food that was minimally processed and food that was ultra processed, but they did a really good job of making them similarly tasty, and they could eat as much as they wanted. And they basically just wanted to see, was there going to be a difference between the two groups if they matched as many things as possible. And very quickly they were able to find that you could eat more calories per minute, basically, with the ultra processed foods, because you didn't have to choose much. And it led to weight gain in the group when they were on the ultra processed diet. And I'm pretty sure it was a crossover study where then they switched groups. And again, the group who had been on the minimally processed diet, when they started eating ultra processed foods, they started gaining weight more. And I I I appreciate the idea of ultra processed foods being there when the zombie apocalypse happens, and all my fresh fruit has withered, and all I have left is Cheetos to get me through the week. But that's
By the way, I don't like that we're advertising for them right now. We've said it
um,
twice already. Enough.
uh-huh. I know, right? We'll pick on something else. But clearly, that's not the situation. The reality is that we are flooded with calories. We have way too many calories produced per person than we need, and the companies are not doing it so that they can feed the masses, so that they can keep us from starving, right? The companies are just are doing these things to make money. They have a reason to. They have a impetus to increase sales every quarter. They got to make the shareholders happy, and so maybe you can't fault a company, a business company, for trying to make money. But of course, it's a major reason why we're a chronically sick population. Yeah.
Yeah, but then
Yeah.
part of the way that they're making that money is by advertising to children,
Yeah.
right? Putting a lot of processed foods in the grocery stores down at the level of kids.
Yeah.
It's understandable. Yes, the business is trying to make money, but it's also, boy, is it in our faces all the time, right? I mean, even my son, who I feel like has been fairly sheltered from the processed foods, still gets a lot of advertisements despite my best efforts, right? Because he's getting fed things when he's at baseball practice.
Mhm.
It's hard to get away from. It's permeated our culture so heavily, um, that it's just, yeah, it's something that's really hard to avoid at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the more I learn about it, the more kind of I get a nasty feeling in my stomach about it. Involving child psychologists, to figure out what's the best way to advertise to kids. It's just like, come on, like, how could
Yeah.
you sign the Hippocratic Oath and then do that as a job to figure out how to sell more soft drinks to kids? And right, putting the flashy stuff with cartoons on the front of the box at kid level. The company's paying more money to have the prime spots like right at the checkout line, where you're more ready to buy, to do this like little impulse buy. um, Kids see from TV alone tens of thousands of commercials every year, and that's not even counting how video games have the advertisements, and um, other social forms of social media, and how your favorite rock star and your favorite rap star and your favorite soccer star are all selling these things. Um, McDonald's in the U.S. has almost $2 billion marketing budget. I could think
Oh
I would
gosh.
like to have
Every
a
year.
little bit of that marketing for my own practice, but yeah, 2 billion every year. You would think, like, McDonald's is doing so well, why do they need to spend 2 billion every year to sell more? But that's what they're doing, and so compare that to what the U.S. is spending on trying to advertise fresh fruits and vegetables. It doesn't even compare.
Yeah.
And so it feels like an unfair fight, and it's very reminiscent of tobacco companies, in part because the biggest tobacco companies purchased these groups, Nabisco, et cetera, back in the 80s, I think 80s and 90s, where the same people who are making Camels and Marlboros are now making the snacks that our kids eat, and and I think that's important for people to know, because I think we need to be a little bit angry about that. And that it's not just, oh, it's just sweets and their kids. And, I had I had a lot of Oreos when I was a kid, and I have pleasant memories of that. But it's not that simple. Of course, it's leading to unhealthy, unhappy, sick people who are dying early. And
Right.
that's a major reason why we should be talking about this all the time.
Yeah, and don't you talk a lot about how it specifically affects people of low income as well?
Yeah.
That they don't really have access to the fresh foods, as much, and so they rely more on processed foods that are shelf stable, right? If you don't have, maybe you don't have a fridge, or maybe you don't have a microwave, and you have to buy things that will just stay good forever.
Mhm. Right. And so certainly in some communities, some households, it's processed food, or there are going to be times when you don't have any food, right? And so in that decision, of course, you're going to buy the ultra processed food. Some communities have a hard time getting a grocery store, chain to commit to building a store, because they're worried about crime, and so you're seeing people buying their produce at a gas station and stuff like that. And so, I am very lucky, and have this because of all sorts of things, where I was born, to whom I was born, etc., to where I can have good access to fresh fruit and veg. But it's not a reason to maintain the system. It's even more of a
Right.
reason, of course, to change the system. And when you see that these companies advertise more heavily to people of color and in neighborhoods where there is less income, that just makes you even more frustrated, more angry, more sick to your stomach, because these are often the neighborhoods that have higher rates of early heart disease and hypertension and diabetes and all that stuff.
Yeah. Wow. So you talked a little bit about like, you know, how this is happening. I thought it was really interesting in your article how you talked about the amount of ultra processed foods in our diets now. And I think you said something like 60% of our diets are now ultra processed.
Yeah,
Is
sort
that
of
right?
55 to 60% is kind of what the range that US and UK and I think Australia. So a lot of countries, big populations, they're getting more and more of their calories from ultra processed food. And it's it's to the point to where it's actually hard. It's hard to not get some unless you're paying really close attention, because it just sneaks in. And if you're not, you look at the front of the box, and the front of the box might, it's green and it's got like, I don't know, a picture of a heart and some, pretty plants on it or whatever that makes it look all natural. And then you look on the back and there's 23 ingredients in your crackers, and you're like, okay, that's not the way it should be. And as you read the ingredients, you realize that there are things that are hard to pronounce, that you don't know whether you've never seen them in your own kitchen. And part of what scares me about these products, there's this whole tens of thousands, 10,000s, I think 10,000 generally regarded as safe additives in our US food stream, that they're considered generally regarded as safe, which kind of means, well, we haven't actually studied them very well specifically, but it's enough like this other substance that's safe. And so this one's probably safe too. And, the USDA, the FDA, they don't keep accurate lists, so we don't actually know exactly how many there are. And
Wow.
companies themselves can be in charge of introducing and self-regulating. And we know that when a business self-regulates, you're just, even with the best intentions, you're just more likely to push some things through, because subconsciously or consciously, it's affecting your bottom dollar, and you got to keep the lights on, right? And so there's just thousands of substances in our diet which have never been rigorously tested. And that's just, it still blows my mind when I think about it.
Yeah, well, and you make such a good point because I think probably some people think they're making good choices by buying something that's packaged that does have all the fancy writing on the front and it's whole grains and it's good for the heart and all of that, not realizing that you really should ignore the front of the box. It's meant to advertise to you. And so looking at that ingredient list, because I might pick up two different things that I think look pretty similar. One of them has 3 ingredients and the other has 20 or more, right? And so it really is important to turn the package over. But even better is to just not even buy from a package if possible, right? Try to get most of your foods through whole plant foods, and they
Yeah.
can be really inexpensive foods. Potatoes and rice and beans and the things that humans have sustained on for so long, that are inexpensive and pretty easy to make, and filling.
Right. Yeah, there's just no money selling broccoli, right? A company won't spend $1 million on a Super Bowl commercial for broccoli, because even if you one, there's so little profit margin on selling produce, that it doesn't make financial sense. But also, if you're convinced by that commercial that you should buy broccoli, you're not going to buy that farmer's broccoli or that company's broccoli per se, because one person's broccoli is probably pretty similar to someone else's broccoli. But if you can But if it comes in a package and it has a different brand and it has different colors and different things on it, then of course you will spend all that money on the advertising for it, because you're going to make a bigger profit on it. And if these companies are so good at it that like you can sit somebody down to a plate of collards and beans and brown rice, with maybe a slice of 100% whole grain bread, and also put them in front of some protein smoothie that has all these advertisements on it, and it on the front is some buff guy and buff gal. A lot of people say, gosh, yeah, I guess this protein shake is better than this stuff. And we're being bamboozled. That's a good word I haven't
Yeah,
used in a long time, but I think it's
I
appropriate
like
here.
it. Yeah, I like it. Well, and we haven't talked yet about how, in addition to these foods being created in a way to make us want to eat more of them, so that there's good turnover, so they can keep selling lots and lots of these. You're eating a lot of calories, um, really easy to overeat, right? And then you're just going to buy more and more. And I guess this kind of goes into it, that these foods are addictive, and you talked
Mm-hmm.
about that too in your article, that it's like these ultra processed foods, or UPFs,
Mm-hmm.
are like a drug. Like, you can't stop eating them, and they even advertise to us about the fact that we can't stop eating them.
Yeah, yeah. The what is it? Lay's says, "Bet you can't eat
Just
just
one.
and Pringles is once you pop, you can't stop." I think that's
Yep.
I'm not confusing them, and it's funny because there's some real truth behind it. The same pathways that are involved in um, addictions to alcohol and hard drugs, etc. These same pathways in the brain are involved, and and uh, one study looked at addiction rates to ultra processed foods are similar to alcohol and smoking and other rates. Somewhere around, I think 14% was the one that they chose, to where people are truly addicted to the point to where it's like, look, you are going to need a major surgery or a slew of medications, and the reason why you need these is because of these foods that you're buying. But then the craving for the foods continues, and the purchasing and the consumption still continues. And it's not a fault of the person, which of course is what the companies kind of want to push at. Oh, it's just you're not exercising enough, you don't have the willpower, etc. Just buy one bag and let it last all week and all this kind of stuff. It's not through a weakness in the person. It's just that these are made to be highly addictive, right? There's the bliss point, where they have these food scientists and they're just like, what's that perfect combination of salt, oil, and sugar and crunch and etc. To where people can't have a couple of chips and or a couple of cookies and close up the package and have some tomorrow. And it's crazy how some of these drugs are illegal, and Coca-Cola and Twinkies are not illegal, and you don't have to be a certain age, and you can have direct-to-child advertising for it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it is fascinating to think about it that way, in that it is in a way like a drug, because despite your best intentions, it's a lot of people will eat it even though they're thinking at the time, like, this is so bad for me, why am I doing this? And they can't stop. And
Yeah.
it's similar to people who have drug addictions, where they know it's bad for them, they know, but they cannot stop. So I think taking it really seriously, that this is not just, oh, these companies trying to make money and these processed foods taste good, but it really is addicting. And Dr. Pierce, I love that you brought up the point of that it's not your fault, because I have so many patients, you probably do too, where they will either come to me the first visit or even after several visits and say, Dr. Davis, I am a failure.
Yeah.
Here's what I ate this week. I didn't have the willpower. I was so stressed, you know, and it's just so, it's heartbreaking to hear because I feel like it is not their fault. It
Yeah.
is not, it's not their failure. It really is what we're surrounded by. And it's so hard to get away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And it's folks have been convinced that it's them.
Yeah.
And just the more you learn about the addictive nature of these foods, is that it's not the person, it's the way the companies have worked so hard to get us to buy more and more and more. I mean, you can't walk into, like, why, if we walk into a hardware store or a or an electronics superstore, do we need to have candy at the checkout aisle? Like, we're not likely to all of a sudden be getting low sugar attack and need to buy that Snickers because we spent too long buying flat screen TVs, right? We it's just so pervasive. And we have done a good job with cigarettes. Like, it's pretty hard to buy a pack of cigarettes in a hospital lobby today, but it used to be commonplace, right? Um, and so, but when you go to the hospital lobby now and you look at the vending machines that are there, they are owned by the same companies, perhaps,
Right.
or subsidiaries of the same company, and they're selling similarly addictive stuff that is just right now so still socially acceptable enough that it is that it's business as usual. We'll
Yeah.
still keep these foods even on hospital menus where, like, we've known for how many years? When did the World Health Organization report come out saying definitively that foods like bacon and breakfast sausage cause colon cancer? I think it was 2017 or 2018, something like that.
Yeah.
Like, we've known that, and we still go into hospitals and that's on the menu. And I remember, I went to med school in Texas, in Houston, and I remember the McDonald's that was in the hospital. Is like, what can you do when it's that tightly ingrained to where, like, no one, it's so understand, oh, well, you got to get these kids their Big Macs and their fries when they're here for their treatments. And it's just like, wow, we have
Yeah.
been hoodwinked. It's my second good word
Right.
for
You're full of
it.
those today. Well, it's frustrating and it's a little depressing, I have to admit, because you feel like you're just against these huge corporations who, I mean, right, they're just trying to make money, and probably the hospital makes more money for themselves by having McDonald's be there and having these vending machines that they make money off of. And they're going to make more money on a vending machine that has all the snacks and chips and cookies versus, you know, more whole plant options.
Mhm.
Uh, so it is money based. And how do we even get it? I mean, I understand what I can do personally and try to keep that out of my house and um, just be educated on it. But it's hard to know how to get past this issue. I feel like it's just getting worse over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It can be depressing, but also, you look at successes with things like tobacco industry, even though they have diversified into other fields, at least, we're not smoking in the operating room anymore, and we're not having the same amount of the same sorts of advertising, et cetera. So there are examples of how we have pushed back and won, per se. And the same thing just needs to happen here. I think a great book to read is one that Janice Ziegler, the editor over at the National Health Association, her Health Science magazine, was the one who turned me on to Chris Van Tulken's book called Ultra Processed People. And Chris Van Tulken is a UK physician, and he has made it his serious life work to really get to the bottom of what's going on with ultra processed foods and what we can do to change things. And so I totally recommend people check out that book, Ultra Processed People. Check it out from the library, or buy it, listen to it, etc. And you're right. The thing that we can all do with our own dollar is decide not to buy that junk food or fast food or something. Like, we can make that decision on one level, but yeah, I think there has to be more, right? So is it talking to your state representative about what can we get this food out of out of my kid's cafeteria? Can we put warning labels on some of these things, especially the processed meats that are known to cause cancer? Should we, follow suit from some of these other countries that are ahead of us that have said, okay, you can't put a cartoon of Tony the Tiger on the front of your Frosted Flakes. Like, you can still sell the Frosted Flakes, but there can't be any cartoons on it. Or you have a warning label that says, like, is it an A, a B, C, or a D? That helps some. Can you put, things like, this has dangerous levels of salt, this has dangerous levels of sugar, this has dangerous levels of saturated fat. And it's going to take a lot of pressure from us, because there's so much money in Washington from the lobbyists from these companies, that I don't think they're going to do it without pressure from us. So we have to learn more. We have to be more vocal once we learn it. And I think there's potential for change.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the harms of eating these foods? We've talked about how they're addictive and why it's a problem, but physically, what's happening in our bodies when we consume these foods?
Yeah. So I think, one that we've touched on is that we just tend to overeat them, so we get more calories on a very simple level. There's more calories consumed, and so it makes us more likely to gain unhealthy weight that is associated with things like diabetes and heart disease and joint pains, etc. They tend to be very loaded in salt, and we know that salt is a major risk factor for having strokes and having heart disease in general and death. We know from big studies like the Global Burden of Disease study from 2017 to 2019, of where they said, like, a poor diet is just the main risk for death. It's outpaced in some ways smoking cigarettes. And so from associations, when you look at different studies and summaries of studies, meta-analysis where they crunch a bunch of studies together and look for patterns, there's just a whole slew of conditions, from the heart disease, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, the excess weight, the dementia, mental illness like depression and anxiety, and clearly gut issues like irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease. And part of it because of the things that are added, part of it because of things that are taken away, right? These whole plant foods that we talk about, fruits and vegetables and legumes and nuts and seeds and mushrooms and herbs and spices, they have antioxidants, they have fiber, they have polyphenols, they have all these different components that our bodies have slowly adapted to over the years, to where our microbiome depends on these things that we have developed with over many, many, many years, to where all of a sudden, if 50 or 60% of our calories are devoid of these other substances, then our bodies are in this state of shock, to where they're not getting the good stuff that they need. They're getting extra harmful chemicals, and then all sorts of chemicals that we don't really know what they're going to be doing to us, because we haven't done great studies on.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and it's interesting to think about kind of some of the things that they're doing to these processed foods, like you mentioned, taking out fiber, and then we end up just taking fiber supplements, right, so that we can have regular bowel movements. You take out water, because that's something that helps whole plant foods be more calorically dilute is not only the fiber, but the water as well. So you're pulling out that water. So you're making things more calorically dense. And then in order to get water, you add sugar to it and you get soda that helps you drink your water. And then the antioxidants. So, it's very pleasurable to have a food that's brightly colored, and those brightly colored foods are the foods that have lots of antioxidants in them, blueberries and raspberries. And so then they artificially color these foods, like licorice is this beautiful bright red color. If it were brown, it wouldn't be as interesting to eat, right? So we are drawn to these aspects about food, and so we are, boy, we're making up for it, but in the wrong way.
Yeah, I love those examples. I mean, there's so many mechanisms that tell us, for example, that we are eating enough, right? One is that the longer we're chewing on stuff, this helps through a cascade of messages within our body. Oh, you've been chewing at something for the last 30 to 45 minutes, you're probably getting full. So there's the chewing response that we lack with ultra processed foods. There's the stomach stretch receptors, right? You eat a big salad, a big bowl of, beans and rice, and then some fruit at the end. Your stomach is stretched. And those stretch receptors in the stomach feed back to our brain. They say, okay, our stomach is stretching. We've had enough to eat. But of course, your stomach isn't going to stretch as quickly from eating a Snickers bar. So you can eat more. It's devoid of the water, so it's more calorically dense. And the fiber is another way, like our gut bacteria, when they digest the fiber through their chemical and hormonal messaging, we're more likely to eat less at the following meal, like the next day, studies have shown. And so there are all these different mechanisms that have helped us to know when to stop eating that have been hijacked by
Right.
these lab-derived foods. And so it's just so much more tricky than just sitting down and eating real food.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, I guess if we want to, we can just talk a little bit at the end about kind of the harms to the environment, because you mentioned that a little bit in your article as well. We know now that it harms us. It's not good for us. It's not good for our health. We're being tricked every time that you pay for one of those ultra processed food items. You are voting to keep that going the way that it is. But there are real harms to the environment with these ways of manufacturing food as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think I just think it's something that as docs, we're not trained to do in medical school. There's no like, okay, this semester we're going to be learning about environmental health. So, because if we don't have a healthy planet, we don't have healthy, people. We don't get that. I think we should, and I think eventually, hopefully, we will. But there's the modern food system, the modern agricultural system that makes these ultra processed foods is part of the reason why we are having as many endangered and extinct animal species that we do. Clearly one of the most obvious examples is cutting down rainforest in Brazil, to where we're cutting down the rainforest not so that we can, plant some soy to make organic tofu or soy milk, right? We're cutting down all these fields to plant cheap soy that's going to end up as, feed for factory animals, or go into ultra processed foods. Some smaller amount goes into like biofuels and stuff. But like, if the forests are the lungs of the earth, and as we chop these down, we're suffering. Clearly we're suffering. We see, so here we are, I'm in Northern California, but we're seeing more fires, unfortunately, for all the folks who are suffering down in Southern California. And there's examples in every part of the world, that this food system is doing us damage as humans and as the other animals that we share this planet with. It comes in packaging that is plastic, and of course, the production of it is harmful. The fact that almost none of plastic packaging actually gets recycled. The most depressing number I've seen recently is that the big study looked at of all the plastic ever made, what percentage of it has been recycled? And it was, I think, 9% of all plastics ever made have been recycled. 9. And then some similar chunk, a little bit bigger, has been incinerated. And then the rest is either in landfills or flying around in the ocean, in the forest, being eaten by turtles and seabirds. And, it's disgusting. And while things like plastics have created some amazing things that have allowed us to, it's certainly in the laptop that I'm using to talk with everybody today, but we don't need single-use plastics to, open up a candy bar and then drop the plastic that ends up in the ocean. So where do you start? I think we just think of the whole thing, that it's affecting our health. It's affecting the health of our kids and our grandkids. It's affecting the health of the planet. And there's just so many reasons that we just need to change this current state of affairs. Pick one that motivates you. Maybe you're motivated more about sea turtles than you are about your own health, but whatever it is that motivates you, let that be the impetus, the fire starter for you, and to spread the word to others.
Wow. Well, very well said, Dr. Pierce. And I am just so glad that you were willing to come on here and talk to us today. I'm excited to get to read your full article once it comes out. So is it in a print version of the NHA magazine?
Yeah, the Health Science magazine through the National Health Association. Probably everyone listening to this already knows about that great organization, but please check them out. Become a member. It's very affordable. You get these beautiful printed newsletters 4 times a year, I believe. And they have recipes and interviews and just talks about topics like this. And it's going to be coming out in the spring edition. I look forward to getting those newsletters delivered to the door here, and I recommend everybody check out the organization.
Great. Well, then we will look forward to reading that article in the spring edition, all about processed foods. So thank you so much for spending the time to talk with us today. And it was really great to go back and forth on this. I know I feel like I learned a lot just by talking with you today, and it's just kind of re-energized me about this whole situation as well. Of course, I try to stay away from processed foods already, but it's always a good reminder of all the effects that it can have on everything that we talked about today. So well, thank you again for coming.
I always enjoy getting a chance to chat with you, Dr. Davis. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. All right. Well, if you haven't had the pleasure of working with one of our doctors yet, maybe now is the time. You might be suffering from chronic conditions, or maybe you just want a doctor who's on your side and supportive of your lifestyle. Maybe you're sick of all the medications, or maybe just you don't feel your best. Well, please come visit us at telehealth.love.life to make an appointment. We have 5 fantastic doctors who cover all 50 states, DC, and international. And you can just go to our website at either telehealth.love.life, or you can call us. We would be happy to talk to you on the phone, 888-420-7284. I'm Dr. Niki Davis. Thanks again for joining us today with Love Life Telehealth. Bye.